Hi, it's Andy. If you watched yesterday's sermon, you realize that I'm reviewing everything about our church right now in order to develop a plan and to present that plan to others as we consider how to best move forward as a church post at least quarantine, if not post-pandemic. We don't know when this pandemic will truly end. But to do that, I am looking at the culture of our church. Now, please don't misunderstand. I did not say I'm looking at the culture around our church. That is, I'm not looking at the culture of Fairfax or of Atchison County or beyond. I am actually looking at the culture of our church. Now, to do that, I'm using a book that a certain leadership expert, church leadership expert has written. I'll talk more about that in the subsequent videos this week. And one of the things that I will do is to use a metaphor that he has designed, and that is an apple, to talk about the three layers of culture. Well, today, though, I want to share my definition of culture. It's something that I really never thought about before. And I might challenge you to just stop and think, well, how would you define culture right now? We hear this term all the time, but I've never truly had taken the time to stop and define what I mean when I say culture, what I believe when I say culture. Now, on the one hand, it needs to be small enough that we could say the culture of the church, or even the culture of a family. But it has to be broad enough to say that it is the culture of our state or our country or of our world. And of course, there are intermingled cultures as a part of all of that. So the first thing that we must understand is culture is used often, and it's often used, say, on the news and in other places, but people who use the word will often use it in different ways and may not understand what they are saying when they use the word culture. That was true for me for years. So again, in just a moment, I will share my working definition. I haven't finalized this, but I have been developing this for the last month. It is a very difficult word, really, to define, and everybody who has attempted to define it states that same thing. Second, we must understand that culture is not bad. Culture is not evil. A lot of people, the culture is just going downhill. Well, there is an aspect of culture that is going downhill, but culture itself is not problematic. It's how we understand the word and what we mean by that word, which makes a lot of difference. For instance, the Garden of Eden had a culture. God created the garden. He put man in the garden. He brought woman into the garden, and he told them to tend it. So a part of the culture of the garden was that mankind would work. A part of the culture of the garden was that mankind would have dominion over everything. That is a part of culture. Thus, in some sense, the essence of culture must be good because God created culture. So it is not entirely wrong. But just because culture can be good does not mean it cannot be corrupted. And we have certainly seen that because we as humans, guess what we do? We corrupt things. We abuse things. We misuse things. We make what God has created for good into things that serve our purposes, and that indeed can be bad. But just because culture can be corrupted does not mean that mankind should not make culture. And if mankind is allowed to make culture, to shape culture, if you will, then that is because God did so, and man, according to Genesis 1, is made in the image of God. Therefore, if God can make culture good, mankind has the ability to make culture good. And if we as a church want to follow our God in everything, then we should look at how to make our culture good. And in making our internal culture, our church culture good, that should then make a difference, begin to make a difference in the area around us. Again, I absolutely agree that there are many forms of culture that has been made that are not honoring of God. He does not desire certain aspects of culture to be followed. I absolutely agree with that. But the entire New Testament is mostly about how God is trying to restore, to redeem culture. First, by Jesus coming to show us how life truly can be lived. And second, by Paul and others writing letters to the church on how they should live in accordance with what Jesus did and what Jesus taught. So, yes, the Garden of Eden may have been culture at its finest, but first century Palestine, where Jesus lived, when Jesus came, and 21st century America or elsewhere in the world may have a culture that got off track from that good beginning, but followers of Jesus can now partner with God in order to change that culture once again. We can make the culture more honoring to God, or at least our portion of it. But to do that, we must evaluate it. And again, that's the process that I am beginning, and I will include others at various steps along this way. Because if we ignore culture, or we simply hope that culture will fix itself, history has proven that that will not happen. So, with that said, and so that I can turn to the 3 layers of culture tomorrow, and I'll begin to share those in tomorrow's video, let me share my working definition. Again, it's not finalized, my working definition of culture. Culture is a common set of understandings and actions of a specified group of people which are made manifest. I'll break that down a little bit more tomorrow and in the rest of the videos this week and try to tie that definition with Scripture and how all of this truly not only can impact the culture around us, but can impact the culture within us as well.